I had an interesting conversation yesterday. My wife is in law school. She is finishing her law degree. And one of her law professors is at Vanderbilt University Law School, which is also where I went, has done an interesting study. He did a lot of work in international affairs back when he was in the military. And he's done a lot of work with war crimes, named Michael Newton. He's on the faculty at Vanderbilt. She brought me an editorial that he has written arguing that what the United States should do from now is, obviously, we're not going to commit resources in terms of putting actual soldiers on the ground. And it's not smart to get involved, I don't believe, in this idea of whether or not you're patrolling the skies, whether you're going to try to restrict the flow of Russian air superiority. What he says is something where I think the conversation is going to get evolved, and that is Vladimir Putin is clearly in this expert on international war crimes, again, Michael Newton, and there are many other people making the argument alongside of him, that this is clearly war crimes. And what the United States should do is Joe Biden should allow all of the people who are international war crimes experts to officially begin war crime investigations. Now, I want to play you this audio because I think it's a really interesting argument that the best way that America could put more pressure onto Vladimir Putin now is by investigating war crimes, because it seems quite clear that those are going on. Now, Joe Biden was actually asked about this yesterday, and I want to play cut 2 because he won't say right now Putin is committing war crimes, even though it seems quite clear he is. Listen to this.
Russia is committing war crimes in Ukraine.
We are following it very closely. It's early to say that.
Too early to say that. All right. Well, President Zelensky says this is clearly genocide. He's on the ground right there in Ukraine. Play cut 3. Listen to this.
This is genocide and Nazism. And I am ashamed that we are in the 21st century, in 2022, and we are seeing acts where people are told, forget Maya predictions of the end of the world. This is the end of the world. If there are such actions, this world is at an end for people like that. The issue is that we are the border, the fence between them and the civilization.
All right. And then in America, there are some politicians who are now picking up this argument, including Ukrainian-born Congresswoman from Indiana, Victoria Spartz, who says this is genocide. This is clearly a war crime. Listen to what she said.
This question and how it should be answered about Vladimir Putin and whether he's a war criminal.
Hopefully, we can have more pressures that for things happen, because people need to have, responsibility for the genocide, for killing people, for war crimes. It's not a war, it's killing, extermination of people.
All right, your thoughts on this argument, Buck?
Well, first of all, Russia is no longer a signatory to the International Criminal Court. They pulled out in 2016 after the annexation of Crimea. Now, does that really matter? No, because you can still bring charges technically in the International Criminal Court against somebody for war crimes, even if they're not a signatory. But it does complicate matters a little bit. You'd also have to have a state willing to arrest Vladimir Putin. And Putin is not leaving. Putin is not touching down anywhere anytime soon where you would have anybody willing to recognize that jurisdiction. You would have Vladimir Putin also arguing that coalition U.S. actions. I'm saying what he would argue. I'm not saying it's true, but he would argue that coalition U.S. actions in Iraq and Afghanistan in different contexts also would constitute war crimes, right? So this is not going to. It's not going to stop the conflict now. This is more of a when the conflict is no longer ongoing, would you have a conversation about this? There's no way you're going to be able to get Vladimir Putin when he still wants to have the Russian war machine engaged in this invasion of Ukraine. No one's taking him down with a legal challenge, right?
Do you think it makes people around him nervous? Because Putin may feel like I'm protected, I'm above the law. I think it's quite clear that Putin himself would say that. The argument I think that is interesting is, are there people that don't have Putin's protections that are also closely allied enough with the decisions that are being made in Russia that it might give them pause and or make them nervous and start to unwind a bit the legitimacy of Putin's reign?
Yes, but you also have to remember that even billionaire oligarchs in Putin's orbit will be fed to the tigers sometimes. I mean, he doesn't really care, right? So if you're not getting at Putin, who can you get around him that would actually put enough pressure on him to make him change his decision-making here? And also, I think U.S. perception of who and to what degree of support, who supports Putin and to what degree inside of Russia, we don't really have a good sense of that. I mean, the intelligence community, journalism, people that are looking at this issue, I think are having to engage in a lot of guesswork over who would actually get this guy to stop what he's doing right now. And I think there's a greater recognition today, certainly, as you have the loss of the first city, although there's some debate or some conflicting reports, but you have Kherson on the Black Sea, which has fallen. You have Mariupol, which is on the Sea of Azov. So these are at the southern part of Ukraine that is looking like it's about to fall. You've got Kharkiv still getting shelled. You've got Kyiv, the capital, on the way to being encircled. The Russian war machine is showing no signs of slowing down. And just because they didn't get a blitzkrieg or a lightning fast victory in the beginning, if you think about it in chess, there are some moves you can make that'll end the chess match. I forget there's terms for all this, but in less than 5 or less than 10 moves, you can actually end a chess match. Putin may have tried that, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to keep going, even if that initial salvo, so to speak, failed. So I think that this is going to get a lot worse. I think that we're very far from seeing Russia feel like and Putin feel like there's enough pressure being brought against him that he would change this. Once he creates the reality, one of the problems we have here is you can't North Korea-ize Russia. It's never going to happen, right? So you have a lot of people with tremendous influence and assets globally in Russia, talking about the oligarchs, who, when this is done, when the ceasefire happens, or whenever this conflict comes to a terminus, and hopefully it's days, I think it will be months. But whenever this actually happens, you're going to have to deal with bringing Russia back into the fold. There is no future in which, and Putin knows that. He knows people want the gas to flow. He knows there's a lot of ways to continue on with this. So that makes everything more challenging. All the pressure we bring to bear, Clay, feels, I think, from the Russian perspective, Putin perspective, as though it's temporary and is set up that way.
I think it's an interesting question. How long are Americans going to care? And that may be the balancing act that Vladimir Putin, in his mind, is trying to consider, right? It's very easy to be pro-Zelensky and pro-Ukraine when the story is fresh and it's new and we're the first 7 days, first 10 days in. But to your point, if this drags into, let's say it's June, let's say it's July, is American news still going to be leading with the latest news from Ukraine? Because I think that it's an interesting dynamic, because the longer Ukraine holds on, the more it challenges Putin, but also the more difficult it becomes, I think, for American interest to remain. Does that make sense? How long is the lead story in every newscast going to be the minute-by-minute updates of what's going on in Ukraine?
There were over 500,000 people, and I should see what the most recent estimates are, who died in the Syrian civil war. That went on for years. There was no U.S. military engagement on the ground. Obviously, no nuclear powers involved there. Oh, well, I shouldn't say that. Russia became involved, but I mean the warring factions inside of Syria were on a very different scale than the Russian war machine. By the way, that was another place where Russia essentially got its way through the application of force. You see the last 10 years or so, in Georgia, Russia got what it wanted. Crimea and eastern Ukraine got what it wanted. Syria propped up the Assad regime, got what it wanted. A lot of help from the Iranians, too. So there hasn't actually been a real slapdown, if you will, of Russia's imperial ambitions. If anything, it's been really building to this point. I think people have been ignoring it. So will Americans continue to care? Yeah, I mean, I keep telling everybody this because I just think you need to psychologically be prepared for it, Clay. Everyone needs to be prepared for this to get a whole lot more horrific and ugly, because that's the trajectory of these conflicts when they go on like this. The first week is never the worst week.
And extend for months, potentially, in terms of the way that you're balancing out. I think there's this idea among many people who are following this story that on any given day there may be a resolution to this story, and that's unlikely. This is much more likely to be a marathon than it is a sprint, the way that it's being set out right now.
There's also a cognitive dissonance. We were talking to Larry before, Larry Kudlow, about this before, and they haven't put on the full scope of sanctions on the energy market because it would be too economically painful. So on the one hand, you have a lot of people going on TV. You have the analyst class. You have the Democrats and a lot of Republicans who are essentially saying, we will do anything to stand for democracy in Ukraine, not troops, but also not make energy too expensive. You can already see there is a price that has already been put on this. I agree with the red line about troops and about us fighting the Russians. It is interesting, though, that the people that are the loudest sort of chest thumpers, if you will, about how our principles are at risk in Ukraine, unless the oil prices get too high, in which case let's not get.
That's right.
That is reality, folks. That is going on right now. So I think everyone needs to remember that as we continue to follow this. What should be done about the situation in Ukraine from the U.S. perspective, from the West, from NATO allies, from the world perspective, actually? Well, we have former Treasury Secretary in Trump, Steven Mnuchin, was on CNBC saying we actually should sanction Russian energy. Play clip 7, please.
I would immediately cease any payments in the energy markets. The fact that money is still going to Russia through that is something I would stop immediately, and I would sanction more people that are around Putin. One of the most important issues for national security is that the U.S. is energy independent, not to minimize the environmental issues, but now is the time to reconsider things like pipelines, things like LNG, which are a much cleaner form of energy.
Clay, this is apparent now. The Biden administration is hostile toward fossil fuels in a whole variety of ways. But beyond that, they're saying they will not. So we get all these lectures about how the democracy in Ukraine is a critical global interest and all this stuff, which, okay, yes, we want the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians and have control of their country for sure. But we're also under an administration that says all that and then says, well, we're not going to sanction their energy because it's going to be too pricey.
That's exactly right. And ultimately, this is a political calculation because right now we've got 7.5% interest, Buck, and we know that the price of oil is going to go up. Your gallon of gas, over $5 a gallon now, I believe in San Francisco area, the first community to go over $5 a gallon, if I'm not mistaken. And if this battle is going to continue and we're going to stop paying for 600,000 barrels of oil, which is what Marco Rubio tweeted this morning we're doing on a day-to-day basis, then there's going to be a cost. And that cost is going to be paid at the pump as the price of oil is now over $110, $114, may go to an all-time high, which would drive inflation even higher. And Buck, you know this, one of the number one indicators for how you're going to do in a midterm or in any election, price of gas. Maybe the most important.